Hello and welcome to another vlog as we continue looking through our series at the parables that Jesus told. Today we're looking at the parable of the householder, which can be found in Matthew chapter 13 verses 51 to 53, which says this. "Have you understood all these things?" Jesus asked. "Yes," they replied. He said to them, "Therefore, every teacher of the law who has become a disciple in the kingdom of heaven is like the owner of a house who brings out of his storeroom new treasures as well as old." Now, there may be some debate whether this parable is actually a parable, because it doesn't follow that clear structure that perhaps we see in the likes of the parable of the lost sheep or the lost coin. But it does include that key phrase, and that key phrase is like. So in this context, who has become a disciple in the kingdom of heaven is like the owner of a house. And because we've got that little comparison where is like, there is argument to say it is a parable. And from this portion of scripture, from this parable, I think that there are 3 points we can easily pick out. And that's what I'd like to do today. The first being that question that Jesus posed. Have you understood all these things? This question follows after Jesus has shared a number of parables, and it acknowledges that there is a need, and that need is to understand. It's a core principle. For those hearing these parables and for Jesus sharing in that first-hand experience, they need to do more than just hear. They need to understand. For us, as we read it in our Bibles, we need to do more than just read. We need to understand. The teachings of Jesus, in this case specifically the teaching of what the kingdom of heaven is like, need to become more than just head knowledge. We need to be able to do more than just recite. We need to be able to understand it in our hearts. If we think back to what Gordon shared last Sunday, and if you haven't heard it, it's definitely well worth a listen. We need to study our scriptures, our Bibles, so we can teach, and so we can learn, and so we can rebuke, and we can walk on the path of righteousness. Or to summarise all these points, so we can understand. But why is it so important to understand? Well, that's the second point we can pick out. Jesus tells us in these verses that someone who understands is like the owner of a house who brings out new treasures as well as old. Actually, in the Message translation, it starts with a phrase that I really like, and it's that every student well trained in God's kingdom is like an owner of a house who brings out new treasures as well as old. From these verses, we know it's important to understand scripture as it's a treasure, because we're told in those verses we're told that it is a treasure. It's something that's valuable and precious. And I don't know about you, but I definitely agree with that. And for me, that makes it even more important to understand. Because we've been given this treasure, why wouldn't we want to understand it? And thirdly, in these verses, we're told not only is it a treasure, but is it a treasure of old and new. But what does this mean? Well, it means that the treasure that we're given through scripture is both old and new. It's old because we have those Old Testament teachings of law mixed with the new thinking of Jesus, that addition of love and accessibility for all to hear the gospel, for all to respond. And this idea of old and new do not contradict each other or outweigh each other as people might think. Instead, Jesus' teachings taught the validity of the Old Testament teachings, but with the new ways of Jesus' teachings. But they don't get rid of the old truth. It's absolutely the opposite. They amplify, they support, they clarify these teachings, they build upon. The new is not new necessarily. It's just bringing those old teachings with the freshness of Jesus. But old or new, together they are a treasure. And what can we take away from this? Well, there's just one thing I think we should pick out upon it today. And that's the idea of bringing this treasure out. It says in these verses that every student well trained in God's kingdom is like an owner of a house who brings out new treasures as well as old. That key phrase, who brings out new treasures as well as old. There is a sense of action to these words. There is a need to bring it out, to share, to display, to talk about this treasure. If we have something that is precious to us, we love to share it with others. We like to share about gifts that we've bought for other people or have been bought for us, or experiences we've had, or stories that we'd like to share. But are we bringing out the treasure that's in the gospel with the same enthusiasm? Are we bringing out this treasure full stop? What does that look like? What difference would it make? I'll leave you with that thought and just end by saying that I hope you have a lovely day, whatever you are doing.